I mean, I will, I suppose.
So tell me about the 10 years at Bloomberg.
I mean, it was
So you get out of college, you have your political, what is it called?
political science and economics, right? It was just those two things combined in one.
Wow.
And Japanese language.
So if you major in that and you have a conscience, that's a setup for a lot of internal
pain and suffering.
A lot of
pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. But the thing that was most interesting to me, and that is what are the incentives? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but what are the incentives that are in place to finance the means of production in society?
What are the incentives?
Where do I make money in society with the control of means of production? And right now the means of production are largely in the consumer markets and in the distraction markets. And consumption and distraction is a very low value proposition to humans, but it's a high economic value proposition to investors and providers. So, I mean, just that whole dynamic of where do the resources go was always really interesting to me. And so that's really what I took going into Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, to their credit, was really driven. The big thing that was really driven into me there was, who do you work for? Who's your employer? Is Bloomberg your employer? And they're really, they're like, you're really working for shareholders and investors. And not in the sort of nefarious sense of the modern interpretation of the left, which is that the whole thing is just a giant extraction, although the whole thing is a giant extraction. But it could also be a giant creation, and investors and shareholders wouldn't care either way. They just want to make money. It's that the political system has created a dynamic where the easiest way to make money is through extraction. So, of course, that's what you're going to do. But if I made extraction less accessible and profitable, then you can make a lot of money through creation. You're making some money right here through creation in your garage, right?
Yes, that's because we have zero marginal costs when it comes to distribution.
Right. That's right.
So,
but anyway, you want to know about Bloomberg?
How about that? Zero marginal cost. I have no idea what that really means. All I know is that when I send out a video, it doesn't cost me any money. And
whether 10 people or 1 million people look at it.
That's right. So like, if 1 million people come to my website today, it doesn't cost me more money.
Right.
But if I had a business and 1 million people came into my business, I have to hire people. I'd have to turn on the
parking.
lights. I'd have to get the whole deal. Costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So now this is this is talked about in the third industrial revolution.
Exactly. Anyway, working at Bloomberg was one of the greatest experiences of my life professionally. I loved it more. It was one of my, I had 1,000 wonderful
What did you build
jobs
there? What did you build?
I built their morning television product. I was able to build their morning television.
You did that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was from 6 a.m. till 8 a.m. That was the first. So that was really fun. And I was exploiting old face, by the way. I was 27, but everybody thinks I'm 45.
Yeah.
So I can be the lead anchor for that product, because you would never put a 28-year-old or whatever I was in that position.
So how did you go from college to 27 years old anchoring Bloomberg's television?
Bloomberg was one part good luck, one part hard work, one part, all those things. But Bloomberg happened to be at a moment where it was going from being a big data house to a higher growth financial information company. I happened to get there at the time that was happening. I happened to have a really strong aptitude for understanding the conversation that they're wanting and trying to have generally about financial data and creating value for shareholders, and was good at talking about it. And so the combination of all those things. So figure I started out as a junior reporter, 22 years old in New Jersey, and then very quickly came out of that and started covering capital markets, which is new issues, IPOs, that sort of thing. Then covered the overall markets in general. Wrote the stock market column for them for I don't know, maybe a year. That was in all this. You had to write. And if there's one story that comes off of a financial wire, it's the stock market story. If the LA Times is going to run one story from Bloomberg, it's going to be U.S. stocks rose or fell today as in the thing, or whatever it is. And so writing that story, you learn a lot, because you write the most important 800 words that they're going to write that day in terms of broader distribution, and you have to integrate all things, how do markets function, blah, 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 blah. And then the real biggie was I was asked to be the mergers and acquisitions reporter. I was 25 years old. I think I was making 35 or 40 grand a year as a reporter in Manhattan. And they were like, you've got to get to know every investment banker on Wall Street and get them to leak you information instead of the Wall Street Journal. And I was like, And they're like, you're going to have to work all the time. Da, 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 da. I want you in the gym with them. I want you on the plane with them. I want you at the beach with them. I want you wherever. And I was like, and they're like, your expense account is going to be $10,000 a month. And if you're not spending half of it, you're not doing your job. Like, you got to be with them out. We're going to give you a car and driver full time, all these things. I'm 25 years old. And they lay this on me and they're like, we'll give you the car and driver. We'll give you the, and I'm like, not going to cut it. They were alarmed. I'm like, I'm also going to need a place in Southampton, which they paid for.
No,
they rented. Yeah, no. So to this day in Bloomberg lore, it's one of the great negotiations of all time. I mean, it wasn't like they got me a place on the ocean on Meadow Lane or something, but they got me a place to stay out there so that I could spend. So anyway, I became very familiar with a lot of with that industry and I was good at breaking M&A. And
M&A?
Mergers and acquisitions.
Oh.
So when Exxon bought Mobil, the first person to report that Exxon was going to buy Mobil was me.
Really?
I mean, I could do this lists of these things, right? And so then all of a sudden, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and these other are being forced to quote Bloomberg because they don't know whether Exxon. They're like, Bloomberg's reporting Exxon's going to buy Mobil.
Right.
Right.
And they don't know.
And now if I'm the person who's saying Exxon's going to buy Mobil, all of a sudden I'm a very popular television guest.
Right.
Because people want to talk about ExxonMobil. So that sort of the M&A thing really led, the mergers and acquisitions thing led to the broadcast opportunities, which I pursued because I never really I like reporting. I love learning and getting information and sort of and all that is wonderful and enjoyable. I didn't ever really enjoy writing. Like the nice thing about being the mergers and acquisitions reporter is I come back and say Exxon's going to buy Mobil. And you're the oil reporter, I'd say, I have no idea what the implications of Exxon buying Mobil are, and I'm not going to sit here and try and figure it out to write 1,000 words on it. I'm giving you your first paragraph in the nicest possible way, and you can write the rest of it. And I'm going to go out and find out what else is going on.
I got a driver waiting for me.
I got to go.
Take me back to the Southampton.
I got to go back to Southampton and see what else is happening.
There's a party.
Yeah. Girls.
Yeah, wow, that's a tough beat. That's a really tough beat.
It actually was a tough beat. I mean, you're every Sunday. I mean, it's a very intense.
It's like, oh shit, I got to get up tomorrow and drink again. Anyway, how many?
But so out of that,
how
sort
much
of
Vichy Soir can you consume?
That's the thing. How many private airplanes?
Right.
Anyway.
No, that's
no. So anyway, so I learned a lot in that, and then ultimately because Bloomberg was growing really quickly. There was a lot. There was always more to do than there were people to do it.
Right.
And so if you were good at doing things that they needed to do, there was always more demand for you to do those things. And I just happened to, have some of the skills that were valuable in that regard. So ultimately, I think then it led to the TV thing, and then. The last thing was running corporate finance globally as their managing editor. I was the first person to ever, at one point, because Bloomberg was growing so fast, there was really, the management was always changing. And so finally they're like, we need to create these global groups and really become like a proper corporation. And so then I was able to, I figure I was 30 years old, but old face. And so all of a sudden I'm in a room with, there are 12 other managing editors who were all in their 50s running whatever. And so then, so ran corporate finance, managing editor for corporate finance over there for years, which then gives you a strong understanding of the reason I was so aggressive during the financial crisis to fast forward to 2009 is there probably were not a lot of other people that were television hosts at that time that had the depth of understanding that I had from the non-television career that I'd had at
Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg.
So, in speaking to that, here's a video. Again, one of my favorite all-time videos. I tell the joke that the joke I like to tell is that Dylan Ratigan told the truth about the banking system on TV, and so now he has to do his news reports from a park. And I always point to this rant, even though. According to you, and we'll accept your word for it, that you did not get fired from MSNBC. You left at your own volition, and everyone was nice to you. But here's that rant. Here we go.
We owe $70 trillion.
Yeah?
I'll tell you, yeah. It's
okay, here we go.
I understand that, but you can't
to walk out a $4 trillion solution, which is basically just a way for the Democrats to avoid.
So this is, by the way, this is right when they were trying to fix the financial meltdown that had happened, and Barack Obama famously, if you don't know, maybe it's not so famous, his entire cabinet was chosen. It was exposed that from an email from Citigroup. So that got exposed that everyone Citigroup wanted to have in his cabinet, son of a bitch, turned out to go in his cabinet. So it was no surprise to people who knew this information that Barack Obama actually was doing legislation to make the fat cats fatter and screw over people. And this is what you're screaming about here. Okay, here we go.
Dealing with this until 2017. I'm not here to talk about plans to deal with this till 2017. I'm saying we've got a real problem, and I'm tired of Republicans and Democrats Republicans who want to burn the place to the ground, and Democrats, with all due respect, who want to offer a plan that gets it through their end of their second term of their presidency and then screws me and my kids when it's over. And until we do that, we have to deal with the extraction that is at foot. It is the reason the financial markets are behaving the way they're behaving. That is a mathematical fact. This is not some opinion. This is a mathematical fact. Tens of trillions of dollars are being extracted from the United States of America. Democrats aren't doing it. Republicans are not doing it. An entire integrated system, financial system, trading system, taxing system that was created by both parties over a period of 2 decades is at work on our entire country right now. And we're sitting here arguing about whether we should do the $4 trillion plan that kicks the can down the road for the president for 2017 or burn the place to the ground, both of which are reckless, irresponsible, and stupid. And the fact of the matter is, until we actually, and I'm sorry to lose my temper, but I tell you.
What I like is a guy who apologizes for losing his temper and then actually ratchets it up one more notch. Watch this.
But I've been coming on TV for 3 years doing this. And the fact of the matter is that there's a refusal on both the Democratic and the Republican side of the aisle to acknowledge the mathematical problem, which is that the United States of America is being extracted. It's being extracted through banking, it's being extracted through trade, and it's being extracted through taxation. And there's not a single politician that has stepped forward, Susan, to deal with this.
Okay, so explain what you mean there. What led to you to have that rant? So now
I was in the middle of writing the book, so I was in the middle of writing Greedy Bastards, which was forcing me to swim around in the really, really granular detail of each of the with the way I structured that book was so there's a chapter on trade policy, chapter on banking policy, chapter on healthcare, and so sort of in the granularity of each of those things, and the more further down I got into each thing, the more transparent it was to see the flow of money away from society and away from the services that are necessary and into the consolidation of the sort of super class, the global elite that is non-national. There is no country for the super rich. Their country is an airplane and airports and luxury hotels, and you move from country to country.
So when you say, I just want to, so people can understand, you're saying I was starting to investigate how it works, banking, corporate, and money was being drawn away from the people to the. So when you say that, you mean so it's being extracted, meaning banks
either in a linear, usually.
So what banks normally do is lend money to people who want to build something, and they create value. But that's not what was happening. What they were doing was doing these financial instruments that was actually not building anything, but just creating wealth that they would then extract from the system. Is that what you mean?
I mean, yes, but I can be more precise.
Go ahead.
What the banking system was changed to do in the Clinton era and then enhanced in the Bush era is very simple, which is, instead of doing what you just described, lending and investing in the creation of value, period, the entire system became one where the most profitable thing you could do is sell insurance on debt. And when the most profitable thing you can do is to sell insurance on debt, the only limit to your business is the amount of debt you can issue. So remember when cars were 0% for a long time?
Yes.
Why was that? Because I needed more car debt to sell insurance on. So if we're running an insurance, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so now I have this incentive to create as much debt as possible, housing debt, mortgages, ninja loans, that whole nonsense. And then the 0% on the cars, because the more debt I can create, the more bond insurance I can sell on that debt.
Is that a credit default swap?
That's what that is. Yeah. Very good, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yeah, impressive. And then when that insurance is sold really cheaply, it creates that much more, and sort of everybody's reinforcing, right? So the car loan or the house loan is getting cheap insurance from the big credit market, which means I can create as many house loans and car loans as possible. Everybody's buying the insurance because having the insurance means that I'm no longer going to have the risk of a default on those loans at the banking level. And the beautiful thing is when the defaults come in, when people can't pay those mortgages or don't pay the car payment or don't do whatever, they don't have to pay the claims. So all the premiums that were collected in the insurance sales are profit, and the liabilities are paid out through the Federal Reserve and the U.S. taxpayer. But the premium is collected there. So the consequence of that, and the reason it becomes an extraction, is because now the price of everything is wrong. Because there's so much debt that's driving housing pricing up, and that is pressing opportunity and available capital away from all the human beings and funneling it ultimately up into a few folks. That's one example of sort of a nonlinear extraction. I mean, there are very linear extractions that are more around loopholes in the tax code and things like this. I mean, there's layers of how this is done.
So the extraction part happens at one level because the way Bill Clinton, when he got rid of Glass-Steagall.
Actually, the commodity. This is different.
That was a component.
This is the repeal of Glass-Steagall was
the Commodity and
Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which you're probably familiar with, considering your
George
attention
Bush did that
to it.
one.
But again, when you look at the combination of all of those, so here's the biggie. One, and let's just back up, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Who's they?
Larry Summers,
okay.
Bob Rubin,
right.
Bill Clinton, the party boys from the 90s that uncorked this whole firestorm of hell upon the earth. The idea, though, it's the era of the internet, early internet, shall we say, and they're like, we can use computers, now that there's sort of this infinite computing power, to take all of the trapped capital of the world, all the buildings, all the insurance policies, life insurance policies, this sort of thing, all the bank deposits. And we can use all the trapped capital of the world and using our ability to calculate forward default rates.
Now, you call it trapped capital, meaning that it's not liquid.
Yeah, like it's just in the house.
So we have something of value, but it's not liquid, but now we're going to figure out a way to make it liquid.
We're going to let that building exist, let that insurance policy exist, but I'm going to use computers to run a calculation on, so let's say I've got $1 billion building.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have $1 billion that I can put into the lending markets to make money with.
Right.
But if I use the $1 billion of that building as collateral for credit default swaps that I can then issue out, now I'm creating for society a benefit because all of a sudden the consumer market has all this additional cash to drive consumption because Larry Summers, who was at the time was the architect, believes that consumption is the number one most important thing a human being can do in this world.
Is consume.
Consume anything, right? And not produce anything, not create anything, not do anything, but just to become a consumer. That's the number one thing. And so that building then becomes a source of capital, credit, right, that can be issued for consumption by using the internet. The key, one of the keys was Glass-Steagall, which allows that building or those bank deposits, in the case of Glass-Steagall, not a building, but bank deposits, to be used for risk capital against lending and speculation. But also, I needed to pass a law that says that the credit default swap, which is definitively and clearly and explicitly an insurance policy, is not insurance. And so exempting the credit default swap, which is one of Larry Summers' biggies, is critical moving forward because
exempting it from what?
That it's not insurance.
That from insurance regulation?
If something is insurance, each state has an insurance regulator that has capital requirements. You want to sell car insurance, you want to sell health insurance. Right. Like there are rules. So I can't just go around I can't sell fire insurance in California, but have no money and I'm just be like, just start sending money.
Right.
But
so when he got rid of them, when
the credit default swap was moved outside of the regulatory theater of insurance, where now it was like, no, these are sophisticated actors. This is an interbank market. We're not selling credit default swaps to Dylan and Jimmy. We're selling it to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. It exists. That's the only place that market exists. These are sophisticated players. If Goldman Sachs is willing to buy it and Morgan Stanley is willing to sell it, they're smarter than the rest of us. They'll figure out what the collateral should be. Why should we leave it to a bureaucrat in Albany or Sacramento or? And so that was a key. moment to facilitate that entire undertaking. And once a credit default swap exists, now you have this wave of consumption because now you have all the consumer, you have all the cheap credit cards, all the cheap car loans, all the cheap housing loans. Just that you have this wave of money flying out, and you have people like Jack Welch at General Electric at the time who are then manipulate, because remember, General Electric has all these fixed assets. So who better to sell credit default swaps than General Electric?
And so that's why they got...
And so how does General Electric each quarter make its number?
Selling more...
Dial up, you get about a week away. You know you want to beat by 2 cents. Open up the risk curve, dial it up a little bit, spin some out. Really? And then what really the chicken that came home to roost, obviously in 2008-9, and so the whole premise of this is we're so good at calculating the probable forward default rate over a curve, right? What percentage, 5% will default, 10% will default, whatever it is. We're so good at that we can now leverage every dollar at 100 to 1.
So when you say leverage, you mean we can
for every dollar the bank has, I can lend 100.
That's right. Okay.
And the only reason I can allow such a high level of lending against such a small amount of cash is because I'm so good at knowing who's going to pay it back.
But they weren't.
No, they weren't.
But they were.
And not only that, not only am I so good at figuring out who's going to pay it back, I also have insurance on it because I bought swaps on it.
Right. So.
But then when it got to AIG, who had sold all the swaps,
they couldn't cover
the government paid AIG 100 cents on the dollar, which then pushed through the entire system. Everybody got paid. Anyway, it's the biggest theft and cover-up in history. It's still not understood, really, to this day.
And so that's what drives me crazy when people give speeches and running for president or on television and act like Trump is the most corrupt thing that we've ever seen in this country. They say it. He's the most corrupt. I'm like, first of all, he's only been president for a few years. He hasn't had the opportunity to do the shit that Barack Obama did.
The sophistication of the theft and the largest theft and cover-up in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a small-time mobster. He's a street corner mobster.
Compared to those guys.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to guys like Larry Summers.
Rubin, all those guys.
And Obama, ultimately.
Of course. No, Obama was the finisher. Because then if you indicted Barack Obama's solution, you're a racist.
Yeah, so doesn't that make you crazy? Because it makes me crazy. I consume the political television, like the debates, and it just turned into a who can dunk harder on Trump contest. And even when Bernie Sanders gets up there and says he's the most corrupt president, it's like, why are you saying that? He's not, obviously not. George Bush was way more corrupt than he was, manifestly. I mean, it's just transparently, he hasn't.
But even comparative corruption, the hyperbole around who's the most corrupt is a waste of our lives.
It's just a waste of our life. You're right. And by the way, but that's what they spend all their time on. Yeah. And that's what the mission of this show is, to remind people, you get rid of Trump, the conditions that caused Trump are still present. As Chris Hedges says, Trump is what gets vomited up from a failed democracy.
Yes.
So right now, what is happening all over across the country, which I saw as a stand-up comedian touring the country for the last 25 years, is that capitalism is hollowing out cities from coast to coast, right?
Sure.
And the first thing they do is build a bigger prison. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I mean, whether you're in Rockville, Illinois, or Anderson, Indiana, wherever it goes, that's what they do.
People own Corrections Corporation of America and their 401k.
Yes, it's amazing. So, and now what corporations are doing is actually buying up the infrastructure that supports capitalism and bankrupting it. Mm-hmm. So what Marx predicted is that capitalism will eat itself. It's literally happening right now.
Look at the streets of the world.
Yes.
I mean, granted, not so much in America at this moment, but people are. People get it.
So now, people like me who have looked at this a little closer,
sure,
than most people.
I would say a lot closer,
but not a lot closer than people like you, but
a lot closer than most humans.
Than most human beings. I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the problem actually is capitalism, and that why do we let capitalists yank the rug out from beneath an entire community because they can make another nickel producing whatever they can produce in another country where people are more desperate? And that's exactly the system we have, right? So that's what happens in towns like Andersonville or in Rockford. It happens everywhere where a capitalist just decides I can make, or GM is doing it right now. So we bail out GM, and then GM says, I can make another nickel by making this in Mexico. Fuck everybody here in Ohio. We're going, or Michigan, and that's that. Even though we bailed them out. And what Chomsky makes the point is that, when we bailed out GM, we could have told them, why did we give it back to the same people who just failed? Mm-hmm. Why didn't we say, hey, you know what? This is going to be a worker-owned thing now. And if you want to do something, the worker, just like they do in Spain for 100 years, that kind of worker owns the means of production actually works.
Sure.
So this idea that it doesn't work.
I mean, I would disagree with you insofar as, so there's, the word capitalism in and of itself is a problem, because capitalism, as I perceive it to be right now, is really just seen as get as much money as you can any way you can at all costs with no morals or no anything, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's how I feel like that's sort of how the current absorption of what is capitalism. But capitalism really is intended, I'm not saying functionally that that's incorrect, by the way. I think
in theory, on paper, it's...
On paper, capital is a resource. Your time is a resource. It's not just money. The community is capital.
Right.
Your time is capital. The money is capital. And the question is, well, how do people organize their capital, not just their money, but all their time and creativity, et cetera, to create value for other people in the community? And the argument is, well, the people in the community are better suited to do that than the central government, right? So that's where the propaganda in favor of capitalism is born, is out of that non-existent universe in which capital is perceived to be something that's more than just get as much money as possible, and then let the communities decide how to manage that. And so I have an issue with the word capitalism because, sure, does anybody want a system where basically a few people take everything and nobody else has anything?
Which is what we have now.
Which is what we have now. But that's also what communism is. That's all. In other words, because here's the thing. Those are all just words. The real issue is concentration of wealth and power in control of the means of production and the government.
Right.
But whether that is, I mean, the reason I have the biggest objection to someone like Bernie Sanders is not saying we should put more opportunity and more decision-making into Pasadena or into parts of Texas, or give me all the power and I'll figure it out. And then you're like, oh, well, because Bernie Sanders is my kind of guy and I like Bernie Sanders' values, I'll be happy to give Bernie Sanders all the switches to all the systems and he'll figure it out. Or I don't like Bernie Sanders, but I'd rather see Donald Trump have all the power, et cetera. So I actually believe that the real battle of our time, and Matt Stoller just wrote a book about this. I don't know, you're familiar with Matt at all?
Yes.
So he did this book, Goliath, which I think he did, which is really about the return of the monopoly. So the end game of capitalism, the end game of the desire to get money at all costs, the easiest way to get money at all costs is to be the single provider. If I'm the only person who sells gasoline, you're going to buy my gasoline,
right?
As long as you drive a car. And so we've now sort of advanced to the point where we have all these monopolies, with Facebook and Google being the sort of poster children for the tech monopolies, and down the line. And that that's why you need to use antitrust law. So anyway, I would say that the issue is concentrated power more than it is capitalism, although capitalism is... because capitalism is such a loaded word. When I say your capitalism is not the same as my capitalism, and your communism is the same as mine.
So when I say capitalism is the problem, I don't mean
rapacious theft.
Yeah, I don't mean buying and selling or markets are a problem, because even where you have worker-owned means of production, they still sell what they make,
and there's still markets.
Yeah, and there's still
make markets.
Yes, it's just the decision making is done by the people who actually are affected by the economy instead of one person.
Sure.
So
I just don't trust any. I guess what I would say is, if you're going to go magic wand, the number one thing is the incentive for the money, and the number one thing that dictates the incentive for the money is the tax code. And so if I have a situation where the tax code rewards long-term investment in the creation of jobs in America, or I have a situation where the tax code rewards the elimination of jobs and the concentration of wealth offshore, I can swap people all day.
Right.
But whoever I put in that chair is ultimately going to be, it's the Truth and Reconciliation, the South African model, right? Where the system creates the villain. The villains are a function of the system, which the system produces villains, because that's...
So we should have had one of those after the
Exactly.
And we didn't have one.
And I mean, that was why it's so funny that you say that. I was like, because I was so intimate in the 90s through the Bloomberg work to the creation of the system that ultimately blew up in 2008 and 9. And through all those, I worked at CNBC all those years. I was willing to accept. I was like, okay, listen, you had this idea with the internet and computers to digitize and unleash trapped capital and all the things. Let me give you the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't a nefarious intent. You thought it would create more money for more people to create more things. But your experiment just blew up atrociously in 2008. I'll give you that. But then you've got to say, okay, we just ran this experiment with these things and it was an unadulterated disaster. So now we need to re-rack and try a new angle on this that's not that. And instead of doing that, it was no problem, nothing to see here. Let's take care of healthcare, distraction. And then, by the way we're going to take care of healthcare is going to empower the employer-based private health insurance monopolies. Do you understand the amount of frustration and rage that I experienced in that particular moment? Because we're right going through the financial crisis. And it was there to be solved. It was all right in front of us.
And Barack Obama could have fixed it.
Barack Obama rolls straight up with the full control of the House. And they're like, the whole bank thing's been solved. We're going to take care of healthcare. So then I was like, okay. Who am I to set the priorities for a nation? They believe healthcare is more important than whatever's going on with the financial system. Who am I to judge? So let's see what you do with the healthcare system. And then they're like, oh yeah, we're going to maintain the employer-based private health insurance monopolies, but we're just going to force everybody to buy it. And then we're going to claim we increase coverage.
Yeah, that's
it's
exactly
enough to make you have an emotional experience.
It's exactly what Mitt Romney would have did.
Yeah.
In fact, that Barack Obama's plan was thought up by guys like Mitt Romney at the Heritage Foundation when Bill Clinton actually threatened universal health care. So their response was to come up with Obamacare. And then when Obama got elected, he's like, I'm just going to do Obamacare.
And then you run a mandate to purchase insurance from an unreformed monopoly, which then sets up the opportunity for the Republicans and Trump to come in and say, this is crazy. You can't force me to buy something,
right.
Which is true, by the way. That's a valid point, but it's a total distraction from the issue, which is your entire health insurance system is run by a private monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of dealing with the private monopoly health insurance system, which is 4 times more, bad outcomes, bad costs, like worst of all worlds, Barack Obama, you know the rest.
Yeah, so that's the thing. That's your frustration. You had it earlier than me. You had it in real time. I had it when Trump started approaching to say, don't you understand how we get at Trump? Don't you understand that Barack Obama actually isn't Santa Claus? And try to tell people that Barack Obama, instead of the Santa Claus, that Barack Obama is a Koch brother. And they won't believe you. They just won't believe you.
Literally.
Just like when you show them that Trump banned the Muslims at the airport. And they're all upset. Do you know why the Muslims are at the airport? Because Barack Obama bombed the shit out of them for 8 years straight. That's why they're at the airport.
He was the drone king.
No kidding. And so when Trump is putting immigrants in cages, Barack Obama built those goddamn cages. When Trump is gassing immigrants at the border, so did Barack Obama. And I guess they should be honored. They were gassed by the lesser of two evils. So my point is that if we don't know how we got here, which we do not.
For sure.
And the media will not let you tell us how we got here.
For sure.
We're never going to get out of here. And we're going to get a worse Trump. Because if some crazy idea that Joe Biden actually somehow wins the Democratic nomination.
Imagine the president that will come after Joe Biden.
Imagine that. Joe Biden, who is just as nefarious as Donald Trump, if not worse.
Sure.
Because you can see Trump coming. You cannot see Joe Biden. He hides behind identity politics.
Joe.
And he hides behind his friendship with Barack Obama. And he hides behind, I'm a regular guy who drives the bus. At the same time, he's 100% corrupt, always has been. And to the point where he made it harder for people to declare bankruptcy because of their medical bills. Because why? Because he was being paid off by the insurance companies. So that's the frustrating thing. Now, have you come to a point where, first of all, let me play this because this is what you wanted Barack Obama to do at the time. They
said, so what would you do about it?
So they say, what would you do about it? And this is what you said. And I've tried to figure out what you mean here, so let's play it.
What would you like like him to do? Tell me what you want him to do.
I would like him to go to the people of the United States of America and say, people of the United States of America, your Congress is bought. Your Congress is incapable of making legislation on health care, banking, trade, or taxes, because if they do it, they will lose their political funding and they won't do it. But I'm the president of the United States, and I won't have a country that is run by a bought Congress. So I'm not going to work with a bought Congress and try to be Mr. Big Guy. I'm working with the bought Congress. I'm going to abandon the bought Congress like Teddy Roosevelt did, and I'm going to go to the people of the United States and I'm going to say, you've got a bought Congress. And until we get rid of the bought Congress, which is Jimmy Williams' constant point, which is get the money out of politics, and until a president says that's the problem and says he's going to fix it, there is no policy that I can possibly see, no matter how brilliant your idea may be, or your idea, or my idea, or her idea, or your idea at home, is that idea will not happen as long as there's the capacity to basically fire a politician who disagrees with me by taking funding away from him. Is that a fair assessment?
So you wanted Barack Obama to do what was obvious, what he should have done, which was go to the people and say the problem.
The greatest speaker. I mean, he's one of the greatest speakers ever. Amazing.
And say, here's the problem. Everybody, your government is corrupt and bought. And
we got monopolies.
And we have monopolies, and I'm not going to deal with those people. And so, in fact, he had an army of activists behind him, which he didn't do. He disbanded them. And you said that he should have opened up his own bank and used 2% blending.
Well, we know. Let's say, what did we do? How did we resolve the financial crisis?
We just put money into the banks.
But specifically, how do we do it? We said we will insure all the debt at the government level. So all the bond insurance is now backed by the government. So there's no, even if the insurance doesn't pay it now, it will. And we said that we would provide all that short-term cash to keep the thing running.
Right.
But who do we provide that insurance and that cash to? Only bank holding companies, a very, very, very small group.
Whereas you mean the big five?
Yeah.
So like community banks didn't fall under this. In fact, they got squeezed out.
No, they got destroyed by this.
Yes.
As opposed to what I was suggesting in that conversation, which I would stand by to this day, is if you're going to print money at the Federal Reserve and offer it at a low rate or no rate to a select group of financial institutions, and those financial institutions are really going to use it to gobble up all the real estate and basically consolidate all the wealth in America on a level that's unprecedented, that's very counterproductive long-term and seeds the ground for people like Donald Trump. On the other hand, if you open up the lending across the entirety of the community banking and small business spectrum, where everybody has access to 2% money, relative to some threshold of, there's got to be some point where you're like, listen, I'm not going to give you $1 million loan for your water balloon factory or whatever. But there's the selective benefit of that cheap money to a very specific group of people was one of the most destructive things that's ever happened to this country economically. So he could have said, your Congress is bought. I have to stabilize. Like, you have a car accident, I need to get you on morphine and just like stabilize you, and then I'll start to work through whatever we're going to do with stitches and whatever.
Right.
Well, the morphine or the sort of the stabilizer after the financial crisis was unlimited cheap money from the government. So I know the financial system's gone full squirrel. I can deal with that. But first, I just need to smooth out the water.
Right.
The lending will do that.
Right.
And now we can get back in here and sort of work this thing out.
But that's not what happened.
That's the opposite of what they did.
Right. So they engineered a system that would just give money to the banks and make them whole. They didn't miss their... And
allowed the banks then to purchase all the distressed assets. Why do you think Steve Mnuchin went from being a regular rich Goldman Sachs guy with whatever 50 or 60 million bucks to a billionaire?
Why?
So what happened during the financial crisis was, imagine every house in your neighborhood for 1 week is on sale for 90% off.
Yeah.
And now imagine you're the only person in your neighborhood who has any cash, and all the cash you're getting is from the government and it's unlimited. And now imagine you buy all the houses that are on your block at 90% off, and then after you've bought them all, the government then reinflates the value of all those houses back to 100%, except for you now own all of them. So Steve Mnuchin was in a position to buy bank debt in California specifically at pennies that was then reinflated to much bigger numbers, and that was not uncommon.
So this is why
you got to know the right people.
So this is why. So people So this is why. Okay.
It's good for Donald Trump stuff like that. People hear this stuff, they go nuts. They're like,
so I had a
send
joke
in the madman. Sorry.
So two things. So I had a joke in my act where I would say, so when they bailed out the banks, why didn't they just give us the money, and then we'd put the money in our bank, and the bank gets the money anyway, but we get a double bang for our buck? I don't have a punchline for that. I really want to know. And then I find out that this was this was the intention. The intention was to bail out the banks, make them whole. Also, they would also get your house. They didn't want to bail out the homeowner and make them whole. They wanted to give those homes that were now distressed to bankers on the cheap. And which houses? Not the ones in bad neighborhoods, the ones in the best neighborhoods that they could now get at a fire sale at 90% off, which is what happened to our friend Graham. And then Dave Dayen wrote about it in The Intercept, but nobody else talks about this. This was
who's one of the biggest private landlords in the world now? Blackstone.
And Barack
How did
Obama
Blackstone get all those buildings?
Barack Obama bailed out Blackstone. The last thing he did on his way out of the office is he bailed out Blackstone, which is an equity firm. And so what is the effect of that, Jimmy? Well, it makes it harder for first-time homeowners to buy a house. That's what so who is he hurting? He's hurting the people who need the help the most, and he's helping the people who need it the least, who caused the problem. And that's what people don't understand, that Barack Obama...
That's why they wanted Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in 2016, because both Bernie and Donald Trump...
We're going to burn down the system.
We're like, this is bullshit.
Yes.
And they're both right.
Except one guy meant it, and that was Bernie, and Donald Trump didn't mean it.
Regardless, I don't dispute that at all, but I'm saying the appeal of those two politicians
the appeal of those guys
was derived from the betrayal of Barack Obama, who had built this hope bubble.
Yes.
And then this massive, massive betrayal already after the betrayal of George W. Bush, right? So you're coming out of George W. Bush and the trauma of the Iraq War and all the horrors of that experience. You get this sort of huge hope bubble, and then it's just a complete fundamental betrayal, which then seeds the ground for Trump and Bernie. And just as the Democrats now with the Russia hoax, and they run Hillary, they not only do they run Hillary Clinton, they orchestrate Hillary Clinton's ensured candidacy by basically pre-clearing the field of any competition was their primary mechanism. And then Bernie was the only person who was like, "I'll run. I will." You know what happened.
And so, yes. And so people are still there. People are where they were in 2015, 16, where they were in 2009. So that's what I tell people. I say, now everybody loves George Bush again, right? Mm-hmm. They forget what he did. And I have to remind them, people hated George Bush so much, they elected a black guy with a Muslim name. That's how desperate people were, and they wanted change. That's how much they wanted change. And Barack Obama did not. It was, as Cenk Uygur says, it was change on the outside, continuity on the inside.
But it's one of the great
hoaxes of all time,
but large-scale betrayals.
Yeah,
like and the thing is, human nature is so visceral and lizard-like in its response to betrayal, where it doesn't matter, right? I will burn the place to the ground. I would sooner burn the place to the ground than let you get away with the betrayal. And that emotion kicked in, and here we are.
And so it's again, people who consider themselves serious in the news business and in the talking head business, they'll never tell you why we got Donald Trump, and they all sit around pretending like Donald Trump is the problem. They're the most irresponsible, shallow group of people. That's why, journalism as a profession is somewhere beneath loan sharking. Journalism as a profession. Now, there are good journalists. None of them work in the establishment. Fucking none of them. Because if you tell the truth for a second, they will get rid of you. They got rid of Chris Hedges at the New York Times because he wouldn't stop telling the truth about the Iraq War. They got rid of Phil Donahue for the same reason, and Jesse Ventura never even got on the air for the same reason. They fired Ashley Banfield for the exact same reason.
I got rid of myself.
You got rid of yourself. You self-fired. You self-deported. And then they got rid of Ed Schultz for even covering a guy who was going to tell you about the banks. They fired him. And then they all act like Fox News is the bad guy because they fired Shep Smith for the president. This has been going on at MSNBC constantly. So I don't see an out. I don't see this getting better. So I've said this to you before when we first talked in August, that I think I'm a cynic, because the problems, the biggest problem is, and you talked about it in that clip, is that our government is completely captured by corporations, right? And guys like Chris Hedges know this, and guys like Chris Hayes know this, but he'll never really talk about it on air. He's not allowed. He has to have a podcast for that, which is hilarious. Why are you doing a podcast? You have a show, an hour, 5 hours a night. Isn't enough, Chris Hayes? Oh, that's right. You are not allowed to tell the truth on MSNBC, and if you do, it's a big deal. So you have a podcast for that. That's where you talk about climate change. You don't talk about it on your fucking show because you're sponsored by the fossil fuel industry and the military-industrial complex, which are the biggest contributors. Anyway.
I'm more optimistic than you.
You are optimistic. No, I'm not. Yeah. So go, because I don't see this. Even if Bernie Sanders gets elected, they're going to either all the people don't realize that most of the Democrats in Congress are conservative, and so they will now band together with the Republicans and fight against him, and they will demonize him the way they're demonizing Tulsi Gabbard right now.
Sure.
So why are you optimistic?
Because the general awareness of what you're describing, I actually think is much higher than you get. Like, for all the Russia talk, for all the center-left talk, that's a very small percentage of the people in this country.
I agree with you that.
And so, I believe that most people understand that both political parties are hostile to America. They're not allies of America. One. Two, the number of new interesting ideas to solve for problems, whether it's in how to do preventative health care, or whether it's how to manage water, or how to manage carbon, or manage whatever the issue may be, is at an all-time high. Like, the number of ways and interesting opportunities and smart people and all those things has never been greater. The ability to trade information away from centralized channels like you're doing here and like so many others are is the highest it's ever been. And so the combination of a large-scale awareness of the problem combined with the largest abundance of basic solutions combined with the ability to share information actually gives me a sense that it's 100% like this is doomed. And they know they're doomed, and it may last longer than it should, but ultimately this is a system that will be replaced.
So
by a more distributed system.
So just when it comes to energy, for instance, so they're able to produce energy now cheaper than you can by burning oil.
You're saying with non-carbon, with the renewable.
So, and then that's going to be decentralized.
Yeah. More adaptable, more resilient.
Meaning there's going to be solar panels everywhere, and then you're going to be able to sell energy back.
Every house is its own power plant.
Every house is its own power plant. And now, so it's decentralized. And one of the effects of that is that predicted $100 trillion in untapped capital will be left in the oil infrastructure. $100 trillion.
Stranded assets.
Stranded assets, it's called.
Yeah.
And then that will make the housing bubble look like child's play. So moving forward with the green energy grid will actually bankrupt everybody, annihilate us. So no matter which way we go, we're fucked. And you tell me that I shouldn't be cynical?
Yeah, you should be. Things have never. Yes, the risk is the highest it has ever been. You are correct. But it's impossible for the risk to be as high as it is without opportunity being identically high. We have the biggest opportunity in the history of the world to actually influence a shift in the way all of these things happen as a result of the fact that the risk to the world is the highest it's ever been.
I don't think I understood what you just said.
When the risk is, because we're so vulnerable, because the risk is so high, it creates an opportunity. People consider things they would never otherwise consider. They do things they would never otherwise do. And many of those things are destructive, like vote for Donald Trump or whatever it may be.
Or Brexit.
But also Brexit or whatever. But also many of those things are super constructive.
Okay. All right. Well, I cross my fingers. I hope you're right. Before I let you go, because we've been talking for a long time, and I know you got to get to a shoe fitting. I just wanted to. The euro doesn't seem to be working out.
You mean the currency or the political?
The second thing. Well, both. I don't think it's working. It's
but the political organization that is an integrated Europe is under duress.
Yeah. Well. So what they've done is a couple of things bad. But they created this euro which then incentivizes people in Germany to save and lend to the poor states.
Well, Germany took over Europe with this.
Right.
Situation.
So now they lend money to you to buy shit that they're creating. And then when they ask you to pay your credit bill, you're like, I don't get any fucking money. We're
Meanwhile,
getting the money
the
from
Southern
you.
European economies are in
Yes.
domestic economies are in hell because instead of having the lira or the
Right. They have the
peseta,
euro, so they can't print it themselves. So like in the United
their
States.
currency's unnecessarily high, basically, in Southern Europe.
Yes. So when they go into an economic depression, what we do in the United States is we deficit spend to get ourselves out of it. Well, now Greece can't do that
Yeah.
because they don't control their own currency.
Yeah.
How did they not see this coming, Dylan?
It wasn't the priority. In other words, the priority was to create a financial instrument that could be strong enough to allow the financing to happen across the world. In other words, it created the opportunity for a multi-$100 billion global financial market driven by the German economy and laid across the Northern European economy that was extremely valuable to the global elite and to the expense of everybody else.
Right.
Remember, you've got to separate the world. Like I remember having lived in Europe for this past winter and was in a lot of business related sort of conversations and this sort of thing. And the one thing that was made very clear to me was it's not that there are wealthy people in each of these European countries that are abusing those countries. It's that there's a group of wealthy Europeans, period, who may be French or Italian or German or whatever, but their national identity is immaterial because they're part of that global airplane class that is indifferent to the well-being of any country.
Yes.
And is basically invested in their own enrichment at all costs.
Extraction.
And is indifferent. Yeah.
Yes.
So the euro basically made extraction vastly more efficient and profitable.
And so what are they going to do?
What do they need to do?
So they're going to get one more fascist leader after another over there? Is that because that's what's happening?
Looks like it. Yeah.
And you're still optimistic.
Absolutely.
That's good.
The size of the negative is just an indication of the size of the opportunity.
Wow. Well, that
Yes, we are at the greatest risk we've ever been at. But then by definition, we have the greatest opportunity we've ever had.
So and this was all spelled out in that movie that was made probably before you were born in Network. There are no countries. There's only corporations.
Well, there's the global elite and there's everybody else.
Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, I know we've been running on time here, so I don't. But if you look at the trade policies with China, look at the trade war. And there's like, oh, China's fucking us over.
We set that up.
Well, we didn't set that. You and I didn't set that up.
No, the corporations in America set that up. We exported our labor we went, Walmart set that up.
It was in the interest of the global elite.
That's right.
To basically, in the interest of Nike and Apple and all these other characters, to advance the policy with Bill Clinton to the advantage of the global elite. You think it's good for the Chinese? You want to go work at Foxconn? You think that's really good jobs in China? That global elite is the thing that really is and I actually think that's where you're seeing again, I mean, I would be cautious. It's the obvious thing then is to eat the rich, right? Like that's where the protest, it's a logical continuation of that. As long as you have a system that creates that level of reward for the people that are on that side of the ledger, no matter who's on that, the very person who's leading the protest to take down the CEO of Goldman Sachs, given the opportunity to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, would exhibit the same abuses, which goes to the Truth and Reconciliation
meaning with
model.
The system.
The system creates the villain. Because you were a Marine and we're in the Iraq War, doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
Right. Or Vietnam.
Or whatever. You didn't create the soldiers or not.
Right. They didn't create the policy.
The system creates. And that will be the most essential point to resolve this. Because until we're able to actually go to the Truth and Reconciliation model, which would have allowed us to get out of the financial crisis in a way that said, listen, it was our best attempt. It failed. We were going to try a different way. Go down the list. So that seems unlikely considering human nature, I must say. People like a bad guy.
Let me write something down. So I just want to ask you this. I forgot to ask you earlier. Just to make this crystal clear for people. When Barack Obama bailed out the banks, he intentionally set up a system that would not bail out Main Street. In fact, he gave lip service to it. He paid fealty to the idea of bailing out Main Street and Wall Street. But he, in fact, set up a system through Timothy Geithner that bailed out the banks, made them even bigger, set up a system to fund them again when this happens again, which, in fact, it's happening right now.
With less drama this
With
time.
less drama, because you don't have to have a vote.
Yeah.
And then the poor homeowners who were a victim of this system, instead of bailing them out, Barack Obama on purpose then kicked them out of their houses, or allowed the banks to kick them out of their houses and buy their houses at pennies on the dollar of their mortgage because they were in good neighborhoods. And so banks got a double bang. They got bailed out, plus they got your house.
And plus, you paid for then the houses to get reinflated through the...
Yes, and that was all done on the taxpayers' back, and Barack Obama gave nothing back to the taxpayers. Nothing.
But more people got health care coverage.
And people don't know that, and so that's why when Donald Trump is running against Hillary Clinton, poor people who were fucked over in this Barack Obama, they didn't come out to vote. The problem wasn't that Republicans came out to vote for Trump. It was that Democrats who normally voted for Democrat would no longer get off their couch to come out to vote. So they literally did do that. So why didn't Barack Obama just throw a bone to the homeowners? Why wouldn't he say, hey, look, I'm going to bail you guys out and nobody's going to miss a bonus. But I'm also going to bail out the fucking homeowners, and everybody's going to take a little bit of a haircut. We're going to write down these mortgages to where they should be, and they're going to keep them. And everybody's going to get their bonus. So why wouldn't he at least do that? He wouldn't even do that. Why would he set? So he's the one. I blame Barack Obama for Donald Trump more than anybody.
100%. That's unequivocated. There's no question about that.
And so why didn't he at least do that? Is he that?
He was a relatively young man with no experience in the financial system, brilliant man and well-educated man, but not with experience in the financial system, who came into a chaotic, most people don't understand what we're talking, most people even then didn't understand what we're talking about in terms of the dynamic of the system. He was offered an opportunity to be the first black president of the United States and be the first president to create more health care, to solve the health care problem.
Yeah.
He was told by men who are vastly more experienced with many more years on this earth that they've got the banks under control. You don't have to worry about this.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this. Whether it was Hank Paulson, whether it was Tim Geithner, whether it was Larry Summers, and you had the entire Clinton apparatus, which is basically an ally of the group I just described.
Yes.
And so between the Clinton apparatus and then that sort of that more senior, more seasoned, more powerful, much wealthier group of Manhattanites who fly down on the weekend on the helicopter and say, listen. And the other side of that was the leverage that the bankers and the financiers had at that moment was such that if you didn't do what they wanted, you're done. You can either do what I'm telling you and enjoy being the first black president and get your accolades for your health care and please carry forth. It'll be lovely for you. I think they'll give you a lot of money for speeches later. Probably sell some books.
You probably have $80 million in the bank when you leave the presidency.
This is going to go quite nicely for you. So if you just relax.
Yes.
Or you can get involved in some philosophical, principled nonsense about banks and houses and money, which you don't really know anyway. And in the process, you'll find yourself completely finished, because if you do that, our capacity, it's like a mutually assured destruction. Like, in other words, if you mess with us, there will be no mortgage, there'll be no car loans, there will be no money in the ATMs, and everybody will blame you, not us.
Right.
So you can either be the most celebrated president in the history of the world or most reviled.
And so what was he supposed to do? So wasn't he supposed to open up a state bank?
No, what the logical answer, I wrote this at the time. I remember writing this in 2008 for Carl Icahn, who had a blog at the time. Carl was like, this is logical. The logical solution when you have all those failed banks is, one, you nationalize all the banks immediately.
And so tell people what that means.
It means that the banks are now owned by the government in receivership temporarily.
Right.
Right? It's like a bankruptcy type of a situation,
Right.
but instead of it being in the hands of the court, it's in the one. All of the equity and all of the debt, meaning the stock price and the debt price, goes to zero. You've made the company worthless.
Right.
So now that stock is worth zero. They did it to Bear Stearns.
Yep.
Took it to $2. But they don't want to do that to everything, even though everything's worthless. I'm going to pretend it's just Bear Stearns. So you take you nationalize the banks, you kill the equity and the debt, you fire the management, you hire new management,
Yes.
you issue new equity, you issue new debt, and you form new banks that then become private entities. And those new banks are restricted in how big they can be, not necessarily by any given number of metrics, but by the size of the leverage, the size of the deposits. I mean, literally, I feel like you could do you could reform the entire financial system in like a paragraph. And instead, Dodd-Frank is like thousands of pages. And that paragraph would just say retained risk. I wouldn't even be, I guess that's 2 words, actually. Retained risk.
And so you're saying Barack Obama was if he would have tried to do something, they would have.
I would argue anybody in Barack Obama's situation would have had to do the same thing. The leverage that the bankers had. Even though it's easy for you and I to look morally and be like, oh, Barack Obama stinks and what a loser. And going to the Truth and Reconciliation structure, there is not that's the thing. It would take an orator, which Barack Obama is and was, who would be able to go into the public theater and explain to the world.
Yes.
Here's what's happening.
Yes.
We need to take these banks, we need to nationalize them, we need to create new banks that are smaller.
Right.
If I do that right now, the existing banks are going to obliterate everybody's mortgage and everybody's and blame it on me.
Right.
Or whoever the president is. And I mean, so that would be the only theoretical way to navigate that, which was Teddy Roosevelt's act and all the, not act, but effect.
So
that would be the only way. That was why I was carrying on about it.
I mean, but why? I understand there's powerful factions who have power over politicians like Wall Street. I get that. But aren't there also people like, for instance, you just mentioned Carl Icahn, who thought that what you were promoting made more sense. So aren't there people
but no, that was the thing that was so amazing. And I don't want to I'm not going to put a bunch of words in Carl Icahn's mouth, but there are a string of those human beings who I was very consistent in my contact with, they were the ones that how do you think I found out that this was the biggest theft and cover up in the history of the world?
Right.
It was in a private lunch in the executive dining room at Lazard Frere with Bruce Wasserstein, who was a CEO of Lazard at the time.
What is Lazard?
Lazard is one of the it's a big investment bank.
Okay.
And I said, Bruce, what's going on? And he said, biggest theft and cover up in the history of the world. I said, what do you mean? And he said, the bank CEO's job, a bank board's job, is he's like the single biggest job, and he's like is to the bank CEO and the bank board decides the amount of risk that the bank takes. So you may want to take a lot of risk with your whatever your little strategy is, and I may want to take a lot of risk with my Japanese strategy, but ultimately the throttling of the total amount of risk that the bank can take, the total number of loans we can issue, the total amount of speculation we can have, is a decision made by the CEO. And when the liability for failure, for risk taken, and so normally you manage risk by saying, if I risk too much, I'm going to lose everything, and that would be bad. I'll have less fun. It'll be not fun.
Right.
Be bad. Kids won't go to school, whatever. The system was flipped in such a way where the more risk I took, the more money I made, and the consequences of that risk didn't reside with me. I pressed them through the too big to fail apparatus into the tax system, which now instead of saying retained risk, where I'm responsible for what happens, now it's actually transferred risk, which is the more, like if you send me to Vegas with your money, I'm going to bet every hand.
Right.
And that's what we created in the financial system.
So because of the repeal of
Glass-Steagall, all those, the combination of 10 different.
So now when a bank overextends themselves, and so there's supposed to be what they call moral hazard, right? So like if I make a bet and I lose, I'm supposed to feel the pain of that. They don't feel the pain because now the government just comes in and bails them out and makes them whole.
Pull your losers off and you keep your winners.
So they keep doing that, right? So that's the big. So That's going to happen. So is that going to happen again? And how soon do you think this is all going to come down? Because it's coming down again, except they've got a mechanism.
It doesn't matter, because the beautiful thing about Dodd-Frank, the primary purpose of Dodd-Frank was not to create a change in the incentive, to create investment, to create value, to do anything meaningful in the financial system. The primary purpose of Dodd-Frank was to ensure that the next time there's a hiccup in the default rate, like there was in 2006 and 7, that it can be mitigated very efficiently and quietly without any public disclosure or disruption.
And that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So there actually is another kind of, the system is.
The taxpayers are funding the financial system right now, but the financial system is not showing big cracks because the renovation to the system after the financial crisis is working.
And here's what you're talking about. So this is from September. It says, for a second day, the New York Fed spent billions to calm the financial market. So I just want to let people know how much. There it is. I want to let people know how much they're really bailing out. So in 2 days, they pumped $128 billion into the United States banking system. And nobody's talking about it. It's not. There's no town halls. Anderson Cooper isn't rolling up his sleeves or putting on a T-shirt to talk about it. Nope, not just like that. And I'm going to tell you how much $128 billion is. You can send everyone to the United States to college for $65 billion a year. So you can send everybody to college for free. And so now we still got, 30, 50 billion left over? Or 60? You can end homelessness in the United States for $20 billion. You can end homelessness, send everybody to college, and we're still going to have roughly $40 to $50 billion left over. That's how much money this is. And they just printed it, just like Stephanie Kelton says. They just printed it. Nobody asked, hey, where are you going to raise a tax to pay for this? They're not raising that tax. They just couple of numbers on a keyboard, and you got that money. Which tells you that they can end homelessness tomorrow if they wanted. They could send everybody to college, and they could give everybody health care if they wanted. They don't want to. They're not your friend. And the problem is right now, we have Donald Trump who's telling people that it's the media who's the enemy, which they are. And unfortunately, that's also what totalitarian leaders say about the media. So even though Donald Trump is maybe telling the truth, it's probably falling on deaf ears because he's the one saying it. So I love how they say it, by the way. This shows that there's a crack emerged in the system. So if they didn't, what he's talking about when they passed Dodd-Frank, they made it so we never have to have a TARP again. So remember that? They had to vote. Should we bail out the bank? Should we not? They got rid of that vote. And so now this happens automatically. This happens automatically, and it's happening automatically. And no one's talking about it. So it just goes to show you, Stephanie Kelton was 100% right, that they could solve any problem with money that they feel like, because they don't ever have to raise taxes to do it.
Until the currency collapses.
Until the currency collapses, which is going to come because if everything goes right with the Green New Deal, there will no longer be a need for the petrodollar, which is what's artificially propping up the United States dollar. And once our dollar is no longer the reserve currency, again, it's also, so should I still keep putting money into a 401k?
Sure. Well, I mean, you're saying, should you be buying equity?
Should I buy a house? Should I buy land in Utah with water rights? Or what the fuck? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But you're saying this in the context of mitigating a currency collapse, or you're looking for
Yes.
The thing when a currency collapses,
my 401k is worthless then.
No, as long as it's, because what happens is, like the value of your house, let's say this is a $100 house, just for purposes of conversation, and then the currency collapses by 50%. Then this is now a $200 house.
Oh,
let's say you've got a $50 stock you have $50 worth of.
But if nobody
IBM.
can buy it, but if nobody has the money to buy it, then it's almost worthless, right? So it basically is still worthless.
Well, I mean,
it's like if I have a 401k, but I can't cash it in because the companies and nobody wants to buy it, it's worthless.
Right. Well, there's two different things. One is, what is the value of assets, and the value of non-cash assets, right? If you just have $100 and the currency collapses, now it's half as valuable, right? But if you have $100 worth of house, then the house is going to double in value in order to offset the fact, because it's not denominated in cash, it's just a value property. I don't care how many, if the dollar loses half its value, then I'm going to need twice as many dollars, right? Like, because this thing is a house, it's not dollars.
Right.
So that issue is that's naturally self-correcting. What you're talking about is the large-scale economic catastrophe that would ripple throughout the earth as a result of the collapse of the dollar, which the world is incentivized to prevent at all costs, with the exception perhaps of China. Who is the number one entity working to displace the dollar as the sort of currency of choice. I mean, there's a great number. I might have mentioned this when I was with you on Sunday night. Something 65% of all global commerce happens in U.S. dollars.
Yes.
Even between countries who are, it's Belgium to Brazil, but they're trading in dollars.
Right. So if they sell chocolate to Brazil, Brazil's going to give them dollars for the chocolate.
Dollar-denominated transaction. And that is the single greatest asset that America has.
And so when people buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they first convert their currency into dollars, and then
because the currency of oil trading is dollar denominated.
Yes, and then Saudi Arabia takes a lot of that money and buys our T-bills, right? That's what so that also keeps us propped up, which is why Barack Obama had to take a flight to Saudi Arabia when the Congress passed a law making it okay for 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia, and he had to fly there and say, "Don't worry, it's not going to happen."
Right. Yeah,
because they could pull.
The reason we've been pandering to Saudi Arabia ever since World War II, when everybody sort of lined up around who their friend in the Middle East was going to be, is the single great. I mean, for the Saudis to stop pricing oil in dollars is the single greatest. It's arguably an act of war, and it's a single greatest. It's